Peace be with you. Welcome to the Institute of All Intelligent Life. My name is Allan Keislar, and today is Wednesday, the 11th of January 2017. This is the second class of our winter term, and we are going to be talking a little bit about the structure of reality, information which has been obtained both from extraterrestrial sources as well as from personal experience, especially through journeys out of the body, what is also called extra body travel or astral travel. So to begin this class today, I want to talk a little about Robert Monroe, or Bob Monroe, who was the leading figure in the 20th century who experienced himself and taught about this sort of travel outside of the body. And first, if I can manage this properly, I'm going to show you his picture. Here we are. This is Robert Monroe. He was an American businessman, very successful. He was born in 1915, the same year as my father, actually. And he went to college, graduated in 1937, the same year as my father. And he went into business as a radio writer first and director of radio shows, and ended up producing his own radio shows. He had his own company that was producing a radio show almost every day, and eventually he got his own radio stations, a number of radio stations, and he began researching the effects of sound on human consciousness. And he was himself because he was a scientist, a very intelligent and inquisitive person. And so he was doing experiments using himself as a subject also. And he then started having experiences in the later 1950s about going out of his body. And he couldn't understand what was happening, actually. He thought he was going crazy because he was having these experiences which were happening to him spontaneously. He didn't plan them, he didn't even understand what was happening, but sometimes he would find himself literally outside of his body, looking down at his body. And he thought this was some sort of mental disease, perhaps. So he began going to doctors, talking to friends, psychologists, psychiatrists, trying to understand what was happening to him. The doctors all studied him carefully and found nothing wrong with him, no physical ailments, nothing wrong with his brain. And finally, one psychologist that he had spoken to said, "Oh, don't worry about it. This is what the yogis do all the time, this traveling outside of the body." So Robert Monroe began documenting his experiences, and he finally ended up writing a book which was published in 1971, which is the classic book about out-of-body travel. And here's the book, Robert Monroe, Journeys Out of the Body. So I read this book many years ago, and then I attended a number of programs at Robert Monroe's Institute. He then started an organization for studying this phenomenon of out-of-body travel, and also for teaching other people how to do it, and other related phenomena about human consciousness. And so, although it was after Robert Monroe had passed away at the age of, as I recall, about 79, he passed away in the 1990s, and it wasn't until after that that I became familiar with his work and attended a 10-day program at his institute, and learned myself this practice of traveling out of the body as he taught it, using a technology which he called hemisync technology, which basically synchronizes the two hemispheres of the brain and makes much deeper stages of meditation and out-of-body travel much easier. So Robert Monroe wrote other books also, and the last book he wrote was called Ultimate Journey. And in that book, he wrote 3 books, I read all of them, and in that 3rd book he wrote about his experiences of traveling out of the body, out of the atmosphere of the earth, throughout space, traveling in fact to the end of the universe, I guess you could say, the edge of the universe. That is, he was able to travel at will wherever he wanted, but he came to a barrier, is the way he described it. He came to a place where there was something that he could not pass beyond. He could not go through it, he could not find any top or bottom or sides of it, he could not go beyond it. And he wrote in this book that he always wondered what was on the other side of that barrier. If there was anything there, he didn't know. So when I was attending the Gateway Experience, it was called, this 10-day session at the Monroe Institute, this was in 2004, on some of these journeys out of the body, which we were doing, those of us who were participating in this institute, on several, more than one of those occasions, I met Robert Monroe. He was, of course, supervising, you can say, the activities of his institute even after he had left this body, after he had passed away. So I met him, and when we reported back, because there were a couple of dozen people in this training session, and after we had these experiences of traveling out of the body, we would all meet together and share our experiences. So each time when I shared my experiences of meeting Robert Monroe, the facilitators, there were 2 facilitators of this program who were very close friends of Robert Monroe, they both said immediately, each time when I described my meetings with him, "That's Bob," meaning that person that I met exactly fit the descriptions of Robert Monroe, whom they knew. So I was very encouraged by this. And so on one of these occasions, when I met Robert Monroe, we were discussing about his experiences, and this issue came up about the barrier. And I don't know why, but I told him, I can take you beyond that barrier. Somehow I had this inner knowing or conviction. So I asked him, would you like to do that? And he said, sure, of course. He said, that's the main thing I've wanted to do. So we went there to this barrier, and the way I experienced it at that time was like a series or a huge number of very sharp, large swords or razors that were like slashing constantly, just moving back and forth and back and forth, so there was no way you could go through them. But I told him, again, I don't know how I knew this or did this, but I told him, well, you can pass through this barrier, but you have to be willing to give up everything. And he kind of looked at me and he said, all right. I said, you even have to give up everything that you know, or everything you think you know. So he was a little hesitant then, because he was a scientist and he didn't want to give up what he knew. And then I told him, well, just do this as an experiment. Try to imagine that everything you know may or may not be true, and just set it aside. Do an experiment, possibility that it's not reality or it's not true. And then if you can do that, then we can go through this barrier. So he decided that was worth it. So he mentally took that position then of being willing to abandon everything, all the knowledge he had ever acquired, and in fact every connection he had with anything. And when he did that, he said yes. Then I took his hand, and somehow or the other we both went right through that barrier. And we came out on the other side, and this is the reason why I'm telling this story. There was a huge, unlimited area which was full of shining spheres. They were far, far away from us, but they were huge, absolutely, unlimitedly big, we would have to say. And there seemed to be an unlimited number of them, and they were all glowing, shining very brightly. So he was very happy and astonished even to see this, because he had not ever experienced this before. And so then immediately he kind of, as I recall, he kind of thanked me, and I tried to say something to him, but he just wanted to go off and immediately explore those spheres that he saw. So he immediately just shot off, just like, he immediately went off to visit one of those, to see what was in one of those glowing, shining spheres. So this was part of the Robert Monroe's Institute, the Monroe Institute sessions, in which we used this hemisync technology to facilitate out-of-body travel. And there was a certain amount of time given for that out-of-body experience, and then we were all connected with headphones. So then the facilitator interrupted and said, okay, now it's time to come back. So I had to come back. I couldn't go with Robert Monroe where he was heading off, and or anywhere else, so I had to come back. So when I told this experience to everyone gathered there, again, both the facilitators said, yes, that's Bob. That's just exactly what he would do, exactly how he would be. So this is my own experience, and it's corroborated, it's confirmed by other books which I've read. One very interesting book, huge book, called the Urantia book, which is evidently written by extraterrestrials, or the source of that information is extraterrestrials, which also describes reality in the way that fits in perfectly with this. And there are other ancient texts also that describe the cosmos, if you want to use that word, or the totality of reality, as consisting of two realms, two areas, one of which is this reality that we're living in, which has many dimensions and unlimited millions, billions, trillions of planets and galaxies. So this is one area which we are living in, which we experience, but there is another area which is beyond the barrier. There is some sort of division between these two areas. And this area, what we're living in, is temporary. That is, everything here deteriorates. Everything here was created at a certain time, or I don't know exactly what's the right way to describe, but it was created, and it may or may not have an end. That is a thing that is disputed and discussed, whether it will ever end or not. But it definitely had a beginning, and probably it will have some sort of ending. But then if that ending happens, it will be only a temporary ending, and it will start again. So there may be cycles of existence and non-existence of this realm that we're living in, but it definitely is temporary in the sense that everything here deteriorates. That is, it's under the influence of time. Whereas the other area is described as being not temporary but eternal. That is, never having come into being, but having existed forever, and will exist forever. And the other prominent feature of that other realm is that it is not subject to time. Things there do not deteriorate. People don't grow old. And that area is full of light, just as Robert Monroe and I experienced, glowing, shining spheres. That world is full of light, whereas this world where we live, it is dark, and it has to be lit up by a star or by an electric light bulb or by a fire. So this is the fundamental feature that I wanted to describe in this class, talking about how these two realms exist. And actually the purpose of human existence, or the purpose of all of existence, is to pass through different stages of development and learning in this reality and transport ourselves to, ultimately, or be transported to that eternal realm. That is actually the goal of all existence. And there may be other goals too that are beyond my understanding, but this much is clear. So that realm is, we would have to call it the realm of God, or the spiritual realm. And I understand that, although Robert Monroe did not see it, that's actually what I was wanting to talk to him about, because I became aware of the central of all of those glowing spheres, the original, which is called in the Urantia book the Isle of Paradise, which is described there as by far the largest of all bodies, the largest of all universes, the largest of all areas, which is the central reality. And in fact, it's called there the geographical center of infinity. So that is the permanent, stable center of all existence, the center of all gravity, the Isle of Paradise, or the abode of God. And then these unlimited numbers, or millions, and I don't know how many there may be of those bright spheres, they are also eternal abodes. And each one of them is also headed by a being who is unlimitedly cognizant, all-knowing, we would say, from our perspective at least, and of course eternal, and is the maintainer of that sphere. Each one of those spheres has such a powerful divine being, who are of course still servants of God. That is, they're not the original God who lives in that original abode called the Isle of Paradise. So this is a brief description of that abode, that world, that spiritual sky. And it is the original home and the ultimate abode, the ultimate goal of all of existence. Although sometimes I think there may be things beyond this understanding that I have, but that's as far as my understanding goes. And this is confirmed by extraterrestrial sources and by many saints of different traditions who also describe a similar sort of reality. Now, coming to this reality, which we are living in, which we could call the material reality, as opposed to that which is the spiritual reality, this reality is also unlimitedly large. It may have some limit, but it is growing. That is the affirmation of most of these sources. The Urantia book certainly seems to refer to that reality as, although having a limit, but because it's always growing, it doesn't really have a limit. And even that limit is far, far beyond our ability to comprehend. So this world that we're living in now is characterized by the influence of time, which means everyone here grows old and dies. Everyone here has to be born, and that includes not only people, but planets and stars and galaxies all pass through these phases of coming into existence and then deteriorating, coming to a mature state and then deteriorating and disappearing or dying. At least that's usually what happens. There may or may not be exceptions, I really don't know, but there could be, I guess, but that's generally the rule here. And this reality is also unlimited, practically. That is, as our modern astronomers know, there are millions and billions of stars in our galaxy and in other galaxies, and there are millions and billions of galaxies. So it's just far, far beyond our ability to calculate how extensive this creation is. And of course, as I understand it, the uncreated world is actually larger than this one. In some descriptions it's 3 times as large, but in any case, it's unlimited. All this is beyond the ability of our mind to comprehend. So that's a very brief description of the structure of the cosmos, or the structure of reality, as I've experienced it and I've learned it from extraterrestrial sources. And we will proceed in the upcoming classes to talk about the history of this cosmos, or reality that we're living in, the material world, which has many, many levels, many dimensions. Different traditions describe, for example, 7 heavens and sometimes 7 hells. For some reason, this is very widespread in different traditions, that the world we're living in is divided into 7 levels, or our level plus 7 higher ones, sometimes also 7 lower ones. So we'll describe that also. That octave also is sometimes called. The octave means 8, so there are 7 levels, and then the top level is like the beginning of another series of 7 levels, just like the octave in music. All right, so I think I will complete the class for today. And I'm just seeing there is a comment: I couldn't give a donation via your website. There is an error. Please fix it. All-intelligent-life, not intelligent life. www.allintelligentlife.com, and make sure it's that one, or you might give a donation to somebody else if they have that website that you're talking about. No, but it is working, or it has been working, because I have received donation by it. So please try again, and if you still can't do it, then contact me and I'll try to find out what's wrong. And as I said on Monday, the last class, if you do give a donation, then I definitely will answer all of your questions. And if you give a donation of $150, that will be for the entire class for 10 weeks. I will answer any of your questions for the whole time. And if you give a smaller donation of $5 or $10, I will answer questions for one class or 2. All right, so I have not yet received any tuition payments or any donations, so I'm not going to go into the questions and comments now. But I hope that some of you will have some good questions and will give a donation, in which case I will certainly respond to them. Okay, thank you all very, very much. I hope you've enjoyed this information, and we will proceed in the next class on Friday, which will be mostly in Urdu, to review these topics that we've discussed in English this class and the past class, and we may go on to begin talking about the history of our galaxy particularly. Thank you all very much, and may God protect us all.